everyone, this is Marika and welcome back to another session on guidance and counseling. So in our previous sessions, we have discussed what guidance is and what are the basic principles of guidance. We've also discussed about counseling and the basic principles followed for the counseling process. We've also discussed the purposes of guidance and counseling. We've also discussed the need and scope of guidance and counseling. So let us quickly recall what guidance is and what counseling is, okay? So guidance is any advice or any information that is aimed at resolving a problem or a difficulty, and especially given by someone who has the right to provide guidance. So guidance is any kind of information or any kind of advice that is given by the person who is trained to provide guidance to solve a certain issue or to make a certain decision. Now let us also recall what counseling is, right? Counseling is an interaction process which involves minimum of two people. There should be at least two people, and the person who provides the counseling is called as counselor, and the person who receives the counseling is counselee. Now counseling is provided by someone who's trained, experienced, and is highly qualified to provide counseling. So today we are going to see the basic component and the approaches of counseling. As discussed, we've seen counseling is an interaction process where there is interaction between a counselor and a counselee. The counselor helps the counselee to solve a certain problem or to develop an insight about the problem, and also aims at overall development of a person. Let us quickly see what are the purposes of counseling and what are the basic component of counseling, okay? So the purpose of providing counseling is to help adolescents with normal developmental problems. If there are any kind of developmental problems in adolescent, through counseling we can help those adolescents. The next purpose is to help an individual through a temporary period of crisis. Okay, if there's crisis, it is of course for a temporary period of time. It becomes difficult for people to cope up with crisis. They sometimes require help from a professional counselor. A professional help is required. The next purpose is to refer cases needing special treatment or special counseling. So sometimes there can be problems that are to be dealt by expert of a particular area. Right? The counselor must be an expert of that particular area. So we have to understand what is the problem of the client, and if the problems are not resolved, if the problem needs special treatment, it must be referred. So through counseling process, we can understand the problems that can be solved by the counselor, or if the problem requires a special treatment. So these are the purposes of providing counseling. Now let us see the organization of the counseling process. So to organize any program, be it counseling program or any other program, it requires proper planning. It requires experts who can deal with those problems of the counselee, and it requires a counselee who has a problem. Right? So let us see the organization of the counseling process. Basic components required in order to conduct a counseling process are, there are four major basic components, okay? The first one is organizational setup. The second one is the counseling center. The third one is the counseling committee. And the last component is assigning the responsibilities. So we will see in detail one by one what are these. So the very first one is organizational setup. So from the term itself, we can understand what it means. So to communicate, right? Counseling is a process in which a counselor and a counselee communicates. They share their information, they share their problems with one another. To communicate, we of course have seen and we've studied that to communicate, we require a sound environment, a comfortable environment, right? Similarly, here in organizational setup, a sound organizational setup is required for the purpose of providing guidance and counseling. So as discussed earlier, we need an environment where there are less distractions. The visual, the auditory distractions must be less. Also, the environment must not be too harsh. It must not be very cold or very warm. We need to provide a comfortable environment. The setup must be comfortable so that there can be a proper interaction between the counselor and the counselee. Now, we cannot always say that for every different counseling process or for every counseling process, the organizational setup must be same. A different organizational setup is required and recommended for different situations as well as different level of institutions. Basically, we are concentrating on the counseling that is provided at schools or colleges. So for different level of educational institute, different organizational setup is recommended and required. The next component is counseling center. So we are talking about counseling provided in educational institute. So all colleges and universities must have a counseling center which is headed by a trained professional. So every university and every colleges, because there are a lot of students in a particular college or in a particular university, right? Every students may be going through different problems in their life. They may have different stress in their life. And sometimes the students may also not be able to deal with the problems on their own. So they require people to counsel them. They require the help of counselor. So for different universities and different colleges, it is recommended to have one counseling center for the students as well as the faculties of the organization. Now, this counseling center of a particular college or a particular university must be headed by a trained professional. A trained professional who heads the counseling center of a college or a university can be a counseling officer who has either a PhD or a master's degree in psychology and counseling. So the person who heads the counseling center of a college or university is a trained professional. A trained professional who either has a PhD degree or a master's degree in psychology as well as counseling. Now, what is the function of this counseling center? What does it do? Why do we need counseling centers? The counseling center provides assistance. Okay, it also conducts certain psychological tests and gives information about the courses and careers and identifies the student who are facing problems and arrange a counseling for the particular student. Okay, so this counseling center is headed by a trained professional and they provide assistance. They also provide information regarding the courses and the careers for the students. They also offer psychological tests and they identify the students who have problems and who require counseling, and they also organize the counseling for the particular student with a problem. Next, we have counseling committee. So, of course, you need a committee. There is a counseling center. There's a person who's heading a counseling center, but we need a committee to make sure that the process of counseling is carried out efficiently. The committee in the counseling process, the counseling committee plays a major role in the process of counseling. Now, counseling committee consists of those people who actually carry forward the total process of guidance and counseling. Okay? So it involves people who are actually carrying out the process of counseling. Now, it does not only involve those professionals who are expert in providing counseling, but it involves an effort, a combined effort of management of the institutions, the counseling officer, principal of the college, teachers, and students. Okay? So let us see what are the functions of a counseling committee. The first one is to establish and maintain policies that are related to guidance and counseling, right? So for any given process, we have certain policies. So the policies followed in the institution for the process of guidance and counseling is established by the counseling committee. That is their first function. Okay. The next function of the counseling committee is to articulate the program between the institution and the community. So it is the counseling committee of an institution that makes sure that there is a connection between the institution and a community. The next function of a counseling committee is to ensure that the various steps of guidance and counseling are coordinated, right? There are different steps to provide counseling. To make sure that the steps are coordinated, it is taking place. So the function of the counseling committee is to also ensure that all the steps they go on or they take place in a proper way. Now, who are the members of counseling committee? The first one is the administrator or the administration of the college. The second member will be the principal of the institution where the counseling is being carried out. The third one is the counseling officer. The next one, of course, is the counselor. The next member will be teachers from various departments of the institution, students, and as well as parents. So as we've seen, involving parents or involving loved ones in the process of counseling helps to fasten up the process. So parents are also supposed to be involved in the counseling committee. And the last component includes assigning responsibility. We have the counseling committee, we have the counseling center, we have the organizational setup. Now, what do? To carry out function, we have to assign responsibilities. So before we assign responsibility for guidance and counseling, as I have been saying, that we require a trained professional, a person who is highly qualified to provide guidance and counseling must be selected in order to provide counseling, right? So similarly, when we provide guidance and counseling, we have to assess the abilities and interest of each and every individual staff so that specific function according to their ability and their interest can be given to them so that we give the right work to the right person. Now, all the faculties, all the teachers of an institution also carry out the responsibilities that are given to them, right? Teachers are also involved in counseling process. They carry out the responsibilities given to them, but they are supervised directly by the guidance staff. So, the guidance staff take help from the teachers of the institution to provide counseling. The teachers carry out the responsibility given to them, but they are supervised by the guidance staffs. Okay? So these are the four basic components of counseling process. Organizational setup, a good organizational setup to make sure that the patient is comfortable, the counselor is comfortable and feels like communicating with the counselor. So for different level of institution or different types of counseling, there can be different organizational setup. It's not necessary to have same organizational setup for every counseling. Second, we have the counseling center. So what is a counseling center? A counseling center is supposed to be there for every school and colleges, which must be headed by a trained professional, a person who has a PhD degree or a master's degree in psychology and counseling. Next, we have counseling committee. So this counseling committee consists of members from the administration, principal, teachers, students, and parents, right? The function of them is to make sure that the process of guidance and counseling is carried out properly and the steps are coordinated. And finally, we have assigning responsibility. So the responsibilities will be assigned by assessing the potentials of the staff, the interest of the staff. But even though the responsibilities are carried out by teachers and other members in the institution, it is made sure that direct supervision from guidance staff is provided to those who are carrying out the responsibility. Right? I hope you've understood the components of counseling process. Now, let us all move on to the types of counseling approaches. So what are the different types of approaches we can use in the process of counseling? As we have been saying, counseling is a continuous process. It is an interactive process. And there is a mutual understanding and connection between the counselor and the counselee. But there are different approaches of counseling, but there are different ways of providing counseling. So let us see what are the major types of organization of counseling in an educational institute. So we have three different ways or three different approaches to provide counseling. The first one is called directive counseling approach. The second one is called non-directive counseling approach. The third one is called eclectic approach. Okay, we will discuss one by one what are these different approaches of counseling. So the first one is directive counseling approach. It is also called as centralized counseling. So in this type of counseling, the entire responsibility of guidance and counseling is upon the group of trained professionals. That means the entire responsibility of providing guidance and counseling to the counselee is the responsibility of the counselors or the guidance staff. Here, the counselor is the center figure and plays an active role. That means it is the counselor who has to take active roles, who have to participate actively, and is a person who takes the major responsibility of providing guidance and counseling. So this approach of guidance and counseling was given by E.G. Williams. It was first advocated by E.G. Williamson. So here the counselor plays an active role and uses various techniques to suggest appropriate solution to the problems that the counselee is facing. Here we have to understand, even though the counselor is a main figure, is an active person in this process, it is the counselee ultimately who makes the decision. It is not the counselor. The counselor suggests the possible solution to the problems. The counselor does everything he can so that the client is able to make a wise decision. Now, what is the function of a counselor here? We said that the counselor plays a major function. What is the role of a counselor in directive counseling approach? Here, the counselor informs, provides information to the counselee, explains, right? So whatever problem the counselee is facing, what could be the possible solution, what could be the possible cause, and how can we overcome? All these are explained by the counselor to the counselee. Interprets. So whatever problem the counselee is facing, the counselor interprets those problems, like what could be the possible cause for this particular problem and how can we overcome this problem? What are the solutions that we can use to overcome this problem? All these are interpreted by the counselor. And finally, the counselor advises the client. Finally, the counselor provides advice to the client. So when I talk about directive counseling, we have to understand that it is a need-based approach. Okay, so from the term itself, need-based. So here the counselee has a problem, there is a problem, and in order to face that problem, the counselee needs a professional assistance. Right? The counselor is not able to cope up on his own. So here the counselor helps the client solve the problem he or she is facing. Next one, directive counseling is problem focused. So this approach is problem focused and not patient focused. So we've been discussing counseling not only focuses on the problem but the overall development of an individual, right? But this particular directive counseling is focused on the problem because it is a need-based approach. There is a need, we solve that problem with the help of counselor. The counselee and the counselor collectively solves the problem. So when there is a need only, the counselor is providing help and solving the problem. Similarly, it is problem focused and not patient oriented or patient focused. Okay, so here the main focus is solving the current issue the client is facing and not helping the client to develop the overall personality. So whatever existing problems are there, they are targeted and they are solved. Next one, directive counseling is usually used for those kind of patients who are incapable of solving their problems. So it is usually used for those kind of individuals who are not able to cope up or who are not able to handle their problems on their own. So these individuals, what do? So these individuals are not able to cope up on their own or not solve the problem on their own, and hence they require a help from a counselor. So that is all about directive counseling approach. Next we have non-directive counseling approach. So non-directive counseling approach is also called as patient-oriented approach or patient-centered approach. Okay? Here, the role of the counselor is passive and the role of the counselee is active. Okay, in the earlier case, we had seen the counselor was a person who plays a major role, right, in directive type. Here, the counselor is a passive helper while the counselee is the active member. So here also, again, the counselee makes the final decision. Of course, it is the counselee who makes the final decision. And the counselor has to accept the counselee's capabilities or capacities to make adjustments and adaptations. So here what happens, the counselee and the counselor collectively together defines the problem, right? Whatever problem is going on, they together define the problem. And in this, the counselee also has the freedom to express his feelings. So what is the role of the counselor? The counselor has to carefully record the positive and negative feeling of the counselee. So in this, rather than providing direct solution to the problem that is shared by the counselee, what does the counselor does? The counselor helps the counselee to develop an insight into the problem and what are the resources that can be used for the management of that problem. So here we are not focusing on what your problem is or what the solution to your problem could be. Here the counselor is focusing on developing the insight within the counselee to make sure that the counselee is capable of handling problem on their own. So when insight is developed in the counselor helps the counselee to develop an insight. So when insight is developed in the counselee, realistic goals and to solve problems. They will understand what is this problem, what is causing this problem. They'll develop realistic thinking and they'll understand how and why they are not able to solve the problem and what they can do to solve the problem. So once the problem is solved or after the counselee develops an insight and becomes capable of dealing with those problems independently, the process of counseling comes to an end. And the last one we have is eclectic approach. The eclectic approach uses both the approaches, that means directive approach as well as non-directive approach in order to provide counseling. Now, this eclectic approach is based on the fact that no individual is same, right? Everybody, we all have individual differences. And so, no single approach can be used or applied to each and every problem, right? So if we provide directive counseling, we are taking only one type of approach. If we provide non-directive approach, we are only using one type of approach. Here, the counselor is actively participating in the process of counseling. Here, it is a collaborative effort, but the counselee is more active in non-directive. So in eclectic, we combine both of this. Why? Because it is believed that no individuals are same, have individual differences, and using one particular approach might not be helpful in each and every problem. So this approach, it works on selecting the best one and leaving the rest behind. So whatever is not required is left out and what is the best for the particular client and the particular problem is selected. In this type of approach, in eclectic type of approach, it is believed that every individual is capable of solving their own problems, but they require help, right? So the counselor assesses the counselee not to directly solve the problem or not providing direct solution to the counselee, but the counselor helps the counselee to assess and see the nature of the problem one is going through. So instead of providing a direct solution or instead of recommending what can be done, the counselor helps the client to understand his or her problem better, the cause of their problem better. Okay, and what are the resources that can be used to solve those problems. So the major goal of this eclectic approach is the independence of the client, so that the client becomes capable of taking care of their own and solving their own problems. So these are the different approaches of counseling process. So to conclude today, we've seen what are the basic components of a counseling process and what are the different approaches of counseling process. I hope the class was helpful. I'll see you all in the next session where we will be discussing about the phases of counseling process. Thank you. See you all in next session.